Yeah, so the one of the things that really jumped out at me about this report is how little progress it seems like there's been with women behind the camera. And I'm just, over the
Mhm.
past decade, and I'm just wondering, what's your take on that and what can be done to improve the situation and speed that progress up?
Yeah, so I was actually, kind of surprised, kind of not, I guess.
hmm
Um,
Hello, and welcome to a special two-part interview series about the ongoing issues with diversity in Hollywood, or lack thereof. In the first part of this interview series, join me for a conversation with Cristyn Allen-Steward, filmmaker, educator, and founder of the Columbus Black International Film Festival. Cristyn and I talk about the 2022 UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report and the status of Black people in Hollywood. In the second part of this interview, I'll speak with Frederick Louise Aldama, university professor, author, and founder of SoulCon, the Brown and Black Comics Expo, among many other accomplishments. Professor Aldama and I also discuss the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report, as well as the federal government's new Workforce Diversity Report, which found that the Latinx community continues to be vastly underrepresented in media. I'll drop links to these reports in the descriptions of the videos, and I'll also include a link to a New York Times article that Professor Aldama brought to my attention that found that, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, Hollywood has somewhat regressed since the beginning of the Me Too movement in 2017 and the George Floyd social justice protests in the summer of 2020. I hope you find these conversations thought-provoking, and let me know what you think in the comments. Yeah, so the one of the things that really jumped out at me about this report is how little progress it seems like there's been with women behind the camera. And I'm just, over the
mhm.
past decade, and I'm just wondering, what's your take on that and what can be done to improve the situation and speed that progress up?
Yeah, so um, I was actually, kind of surprised, kind of not, I guess.
hmm
But I think what I do think is that since this is part one, so I want to get this out the way. Since this is part one, we're talking about film. I
hmm
will say a lot of the women that we see behind the camera are going to be in television,
Right.
especially when you're watching those credits. A lot of those directors, a lot of those writers, a lot of those TV show writers, those is women. Women is they're kind of that's the domain that I'm currently seeing. It's a lot of older trends in terms of when it comes to films.
hmm
I really just think um, because of the opportunities that are in TV. I really think that that's where women are going, or that's where they're starting, or they're getting a lot of opportunities that way, and ways to kind of increase um, getting more women behind the camera. I think it would just have to be that ebb and flow. I know that sounds like a lazy answer, but I really think that sometimes, excuse me, I really think that sometimes it's all about what the trends are at the time. Because I do feel like in the early 2010s, we did have this surge of women behind the camera. And a
hmm
lot of those women now are doing TV. Um, and so you have, your Tina Marburys, you have your Cheryl Dunyays, your Ava DuVernays that are, they're on the TV side. And then you
hmm
have the entrance of a lot of other women who are behind the scenes as well. And they're just taking their liking to TV. I also think it has a lot to do with budgets, right? And so it kind of already being difficult for um, women to kind of sometimes it just depends, right? So sometimes it's kind of uh, convoluted in the ways of trying to create or build a crew.
hmm
But it seems as though when it comes to studios, um, I'm not sure why there aren't many options. I don't know if it's not about getting things greenlit. I don't know if it's just like when things do get greenlit, there's not many directors for hire and there's more female or women directors that are tours. And so that kind of limits the range. I think there's a lot of that creative side of it that kind of also begs the question because, of course, they're talking about the actual employment. But I think we also have to consider what is the content. right? So who is creating the content? Are they more director for hires or are they artors? Because of course, and I bring this up, if you're talking about an Ava DuVernay, you're talking about an auteur, you know.
Right,
So
right.
you know, she's not going to be a director for hire. She's going to create her own thing, find her own crews. You give her the money. That's kind of how that works. And so I think it's a lot of variables and how that can change. But I think um, one thing is to, you know, increase those budgets, letting, you know, that representation in general of being a director for hire, because I also see that with Erica Watson, in terms of her directing TV shows. Again, back to TV, she is in that lane almost exclusively. But it's also kind of like, um, are these films that are led by women, where are they? If they do exist on a larger scale, that would change the percentage and uptick some of those statistics. We have to consider, are some of these filmmakers, for instance, on Tubi, or are they on, you know, other streaming sites that aren't a part of this, or are they in the festival circuit? And so, because we kind of just see there's always like these, you know, folks that are creating that are making content that's popular, but it's not in an avenue which is mainstream. And so that always begs the question of where the research is placed. And so I think it's kind of like that representation and diversity in terms of what we deem as being independent and theatrical, um, in terms of that opportunity to say, okay, I made a film. We have a special selection at Tribeca. How can we, you know, it didn't get picked up for whatever reason. So we don't have that opportunity to see it on Netflix or see it on Amazon. And so I think that's also kind of part of the issue, when it comes to how do we change things. Who is saying yes to the stories? Who is saying no? Um, because women creators, they exist, they're everywhere. Is how do we get access to them to be able um, to raise these percentages or change what the conversation is?
I think those are all good points, especially the points about a lot of women are working in television rather than mainstream theatrically released films. And do you think it's also that, especially since the pandemic, Hollywood has like narrowed the type of movies that are released in theaters? They're, you know, it's basically the superhero movies and like big budget action movies. And maybe, as you said, someone like an Ava DuVernay, that's not her main focus, is trying to, you know, get the next Marvel movie or whatever. Do you think that plays a fact? You know,
Right.
not as many romantic comedies or not as many dramas, and those type of movies are a lot of times, like you said, going straight to streaming. So do you think that has something to do with it?
Absolutely. Because I can even say, for instance, according to the report, talking about genres and how the drama and action genres are almost 50% more in terms
Yeah.
of the creation of these, than anything else. And it is like, okay, so you have a Marvel film that comes out specifically, or you have a DC film, right? So you have Patty Jenkins that's kind of in that camp. But when you talk about Marvel, they're not asking women to direct those films. And so it kind of is that question, like, so not, then the question kind of turns itself in his head, is like, okay, well, it's not that women don't exist at this, you know, long form level, but
Mhm.
are they even in the running, or is there a consideration? Because I'm sure in any kind of fantastical way, if we think about people that we would want to see direct these films, I don't think they would say no,
Right.
especially um, when we know that Disney did give Ava a certain amount of money to do Wrinkle in Time. And of course, we talk about how well it did or how well it didn't, but the fact that the opportunity exists. So we know it's not something that won't happen. We know it's not something that can't happen. So it's really just, you know, we get these opportunities and it's kind of like, well, let's just see how it works. And it may just be like one of those situations where people just weren't interested in that film at the time. But also, very comparatively, this film came out the same time Black Panther did.
Right.
So it it kind of crumbled into itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that in terms of the budget and her saying being at the helm of such a huge fantasy story, and a literary work in that type of way, sci-fi fantasy, um, was not like groundbreaking in the sense where, oh, women don't do this type of work, because that's false, right? Because we
Mhm.
have our Octavia Butlers in terms of literary, we have our Roxane Gay. So that doesn't mean that any director, any woman director, wouldn't be excited to be at the helm of directing that. It really is, this question of why aren't these directors being asked, or why aren't they on a short list? Um, and so I think it's also, when you talk about representation, it's also kind of like a selling point to us, all of us in the industry. It's kind of like, let's encourage people to get into the industry, that type of thing. Um, but yeah.
Do you think also there might be somewhat of a misconception among the public? They see the Ava DuVernays, they see Oprah Winfrey, they see, Shonda Rhimes, and they think, oh, well, Black women must be doing awesome because you have all these women who are flourishing. But as you noted, most of them are in television. They're not necessarily directing full-length feature big commercial blockbusters. So do you think the public needs to
Right.
be educated about the fact that there needs to be more representation for women, especially Black women, behind the camera?
I do, because I do think that when we have these type of one multi hyphenate
Hmm.
people that you name, right? And then you have these people who have found great success publicly as well as financially. It kind of becomes this monopoly. And it kind of becomes like this thing like, well, Shonda Rhimes only rules this thing, and there's
Right.
no space for anyone else, which isn't true, because with stars, you have P Valley, for instance. And so there are stories that are wanting to be told from all different places. And of course, I'll try to keep it to film, but just as an example, in saying that um, there are multiple stories that, folks do want to share. And it is just about, that the opportunity. Um, yeah, I'm sorry, I lost track.
No, 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 no. I totally agree with you. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me from the report is and this phrase really just kind of grated on me, where they said that Blacks are overrepresented in the industry because, African Americans make up 13% of the US population, but 19% of people in the industry. I think that's just so misleading. It's like saying because Barack Obama was elected president, racism is over, and we live in a post-racial society. It's like these are always precarious. I mean, the representation of African Americans, any people of color, is always precarious. It's like there was a big wave of Black sitcoms in the 90s, but that wave went away. So to say that Blacks are overrepresented, I just don't think is an accurate term. What do you make of that?
Um, I don't think it's accurate either. And that is at the point of the report where I said to myself, I understand the films that did come out, but now I need a list of what films you all were taking to kind of do this research. And I didn't find that anywhere in the report, unless I needed to do some
I
different
didn't
type of
either.
research.
Yeah, I didn't either. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my thought was, so you all took this survey of 252 films that you said were released in these various platforms or these various ways of the year, of this year, of this 12-month span.
Hmm.
And when I think about the films that I watched in the past year, I do not see any overrepresentation of what's happening. A lot of the films, and I feel like we've kind of returned to this whitewashing of media. So
Hmm.
I'm going to the movies a lot more often now,
Me too. Yeah.
because I'm more comfortable being in that space. And so I'm there watching trailers and we're watching these films. And I would have to say that this content may feature, Black folks in the cast, and there may
Mhm.
be one person and it may be a woman. It's not every film. It's still very white.
Yeah.
Um, so even when you're talking about genres, and we know that all and Black people and other people of color, we have content in every genre. However, we are still seeing only, white horror films. You have this conversation of a Jordan Peele, which is kind of like that same conversation about this monopoly. Well, we have a Jordan Peele, isn't that enough? Well, no,
Right.
because there are tons of people that are making horror films and tons of people that are exploring sci-fi. That is absolutely, we are interested in all those types of things. And so it's kind of to say that, oh, well, Black people as a whole aren't interested in sci-fi. So that's why we have one person that is doing that. And I feel like it's kind of like in a way of Hollywood where you've given one person permission to be able to do that. But what about the other folks that have the same wherewithal when it comes to that? And it's not that opportunity given to them, right? So even if we talk about historically, like F. Gary Gray or even Tim Story and the late John Singleton, these were all directors who also were interested in action films and sci-fi and heist films and these types of heist being a subgenre of a gangster film or of a action drama. They and as being not only directors of hires but also being auteurs as well,
Mhm.
which also begs the question that where is the overrepresentation, right?
Right.
So
Right.
after Fantastic Four, we kind of secretly asked Tim Story to do other Marvel things, but I don't think that he doesn't have the skill to be able to bring to life something that is great from a Marvel camp or anything like that. The same thing when you're talking about action films, and Marvel and the big blockbusters still fall under that. F. Gary Gray kind of had his stint in Fast and Furious, but he could be asked to do tons of different things. Um, and I think that's also part of it, right? So the question isn't that people aren't interested in the content or um, that there wouldn't be an audience if you gave someone else a chance, right?
Right. Right.
But watching these trailers, you have your Halloween ends, and so that's a whole conversation about this franchise and these reboots and why are we doing this and them ending a franchise.
Mhm.
um and the film Smile and that horror film. And what I think is interesting and why I bring that up is because, of course, that was released in theaters, but it's not considered like a huge um, film in terms of like independent production companies and its creation. But it is one of those films that still is going to take money from people of color and Black folks, and not have any Black people exclusively like in this film. Like there might be one character. I think
Right.
her romantic interest was a Black man, and then he didn't have a huge role, and so that was another question about leads, um, which I thought was very interesting. And they talk about how, um, unless I'm mixing this up with the directors, but they did mention that women leads. Uh, they were talking about there were more. The overrepresentation talked about, even though there was more representation for Black men, it
Uh-huh.
was still less women.
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, okay, so how does this make sense?
Right.
Because,
Right.
and then they were saying, and then if it had a, and then if the, and then on the other note, and then it said if there was a director, a woman director, 40% of the cast would be diverse,
Okay.
or at least 40% of the cast would be diverse or something like that, which I thought was very interesting because then it's kind of like, again, what are these films who are the directors that you're including in this list? Because I can even say, even if your list is 252 films, that's not even a 16th of the films that get released a year. And
Right.
so, I understand them trying to basically focus on specific films because, of course, you have, the people, the streaming sites and entities that were participating in the research. So it's also biased to that, because we're getting content from so many places.
Right.
We're getting content from so many places. So are we also saying, what about, all these other places that have streaming, and even if they're not new? So that's another thing, is that is also where streaming attention is going. So for
Right.
instance, if I'm watching Canopy or if I'm watching the Criterion channel, and
Mhm.
that's what I'm spending money and spending time on. And so then, as an audience, where are those folks in terms of the whole of the community? Which is another
Exactly.
thing that was a question that I actually thought about, because I thought that some of the figures in terms of where they were getting the research was very limited. Um, which yeah, just kept going back to that. What were these films? What were these films? So
Right. And I think you raised an excellent point about there might be with the term overrepresentation, there might be one Black character. Like I just saw the movie See How They Run. I think that's the title, that's based on the Agatha
mhm,
Christie book or play.
mhm,
And I think that I always have trouble pronouncing his name. David Oyelowo, I think, is that how you pronounce his name?
yes.
He's in it, but
Mhm,
he's in a handful of scenes and he's a supporting character. So
right.
he's not a lead, he's not a major driver of the plot. And yes, it's sort of innovative that a story that's set in the 1930s or 40s, whenever it's a period movie, that they have a major
Mhm,
or a Black character, but he's still not a major character. So if they're counting roles like that in, quote unquote overrepresentation, that's not representative because it's not a lead role.
right.
Yeah.
The same thing with Bullet Train,
Yeah.
right? So the same Bullet Train, the same thing with Amsterdam. Like, okay, great. The same thing with Knives is Out. This would
Hmm.
fall. All of these films, in terms of their idea of over representation, is contradictory, because those would only specifically be categorized under the diversity. The What was it called specifically when they talked about the overall diversity of the
Right,
cast?
right.
Um, characters aren't, if these characters aren't leads. Um, and so, but also to that point, these folks are not leads, but they're also prominent actors in Hollywood. So then
Hmm.
it begs the question, why aren't they leads? You
Exactly.
know, uh, Daniel is Martin Luther King for this generation,
Yeah,
so it's kind
yeah,
of like, what, like what
yeah.
is going on? Um, and I think what's his name? Brian Henry Tyree has
Hmm.
definitely made a name for himself, not only with Atlanta, but the roles that he's had in other films, which I also think they need to give him more lead roles. Like, yes, he
Absolutely.
does great at supporting, but he definitely has the chops to do lead roles. I mean, we see that in Atlanta, and it definitely would translate to uh, the other films. But I think. Um, I did want to check something. Did they have okay. I think another thing which is interesting is in wanting to know what what the list was in terms of film is uh Prime Video is not listed as a sponsor, but I don't know if that wasn't in their bulk of films. And the
Right.
reason why I bring up Prime Video is Prime Video has had, since in uh, pandemic, post pandemic, and that using that language, there has been uh, more than a handful of films that have been released on Prime Video that
Exactly.
had black casts, black actors, or black cast. I'm sorry, black cast, black directors, black writers. That I wonder if that's a part of it, right? So we have movies like Black Box. We have films like Master. We have films, or we have films like
The Coming to America sequel.
Coming to America sequel. These type of films that uh, are talked about. I've had
Yes.
conversations in
Yes.
about these films. And you know, and then like I said, on the TV side, there's also some content there as well, which I hope for part two, there is more information in terms of, you know, Prime Video as being a huge driver when it comes to content, because it gives artists access to also upload their own content.
Yes.
And so that's a thing. And then you have, of course, like I said, like you have these shows, you have these films that are on Prime Video. Like I think I don't remember who has the contract, so I could be misspeaking, but I want to say I believe that Creed 2 was a part of a Prime release. But
Right.
also when we and even going back to that genre conversation, Sylvie's Love was a huge Prime release. And
Yes.
that was a big deal because we're talking about romance when it comes to Black film and
Yes.
that authentic story. Because when is the last time we've had a romance, right? In
Right.
this magnitude. And is that film counted in the research? Um, but you also have like Regina Hall and Master. That film is like a thriller. It's a horror film. Are we talking about that? And but also that doesn't mean that doesn't mean overrepresentation either. I'm noting these because I'm wondering if they're part of the research, but that doesn't mean just because you have these films, that doesn't mean that it's overrepresentation either. Because I named two films, I named three films,
Right. Right.
four films, right? And so you know, and then one of those films, one of the films out of Sylvie's Love, Master, Black Box, and Coming to America, is out of those films, you have another entity of Eddie Murphy.
Right.
All right, so we already know that's an audience. We already know that that's going to work. These other three things, they absolutely did work. But I feel like those are just the beginning, or that's just a continuation, or that's just a normal. It's a standard or an expectation. For me, I guess I don't see those as being those are groundbreaking or innovations. It's just
Hmm.
kind of like, are these being counted also? Because content, one thing I do agree with is that there is more access to content that does exist where now I can turn on my TV and not watch anything white. Like that is a thing. Um, oh no.
Yeah, you can curate your own experience now.
Right, which I feel like growing up that wasn't an option. Not
No, not at
even
all.
for, you know, not even for, you know, being a teen, being in my 20s, you know, when I was college age and grad school, that wasn't an option. You had your, oh, my Shonda Rhimes shows. But even
Yes.
then, okay, even then, let's talk about how part of it, one of the statistics talked about the diversity of cast, even if a minority is at the helm of the film.
Hmm.
So you have, so say for instance, you have a Black director, but your cast is diverse, but your lead may not be Black, or your
Right.
lead may not be a woman. And so again, off the top of my head, I can't recall any films like this. So I would want to know who are they talking about to have, you
Well,
know, they have a whole chart.
yeah, well, maybe one example is, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but maybe like something like The Old Guard that was directed by Gina Prince Bythewood, where Charlize
Okay,
Theron was the lead. Well, that's a
right.
woman, obviously,
Okay,
but not a
right.
Black woman.
Yes.
Yeah,
Not a Black woman, yes. So
yeah.
then they talk about that as well. So even saying that when women are directors and how they still have they have a more diverse cast than their male counterparts. And
Hmm.
so even when it comes to Ava DuVernay, she's made
Hmm.
a thing to say, I want women. It doesn't matter what they look like. I just want women behind the camera. I want
Hmm.
women in my crew. And so that is true. I think that and I do think it's interesting, and I do wonder what the answer would be. Why are women more apt to be diverse behind the camera than men, regardless of their race? So we do see that it's not abnormal, and I think even though I didn't think about that, and I didn't think about the old guard because it's something that is like, oh, okay, well that makes sense, like
Hmm.
that type of thing. But if it was, I don't know. Why is that? I guess that is the question to you. Why do you think that there's more diversity of cast when a woman is directing a film than not?
Well, I guess the obvious reason would be, if you've been a target of discrimination yourself, or you feel like you've been relegated to the margins, then you're more likely to be sensitive and say, okay, when I get the chance to be in charge, I'm going to, I'm going to not do all the things that make me feel excluded. I'm going to foster an environment of inclusion. So that would be the obvious answer. I don't know if that's always the case, but what do you think about that?
I do think that is is definitely a popular theory in terms of any groups that have been oppressed, because it's definitely something that we see a lot of as being a queer creative,
Right.
and saying we want queer people to be here, because that's also one of those underrepresented underrepresented um, things that exist, which are is also very very whitewashed.
Yes.
But again, when we talk about queer creatives in those stories, we see TV winning, and we see TV showing up for those folks, and for those stories and that representation, and actually hiring casts who are part of queer and trans communities. So we do see that a lot, and I think that that definitely, is the answer in a lot of ways. We want safer cultures. We want to change the culture of the film set. Why should it be homogenous? Um, and I think the idea outside of saying, when I have a chance, this is what I'm going to do, you find that your art and your story is just more fruitful when you have different ideas and different backgrounds approaching a vision.
I
When you have
agree.
Yeah, when you have different cultures and their perspectives, there's something more well-rounded about the work that you're presenting. And I mean, you just can't fail. You just can't
Absolutely.
fail that type of way. And so I think that's also part of it. Um, yeah, I think that that's also just part of it. Because we do see this when we see um, the teams that Ryan Coogler puts together.
Right.
We see these really good stories. We're like, what is happening? This is amazing. We see this when Spike Lee is putting stuff together.
Right.
We're like, of course, and of course, we're used to the things that he's doing now. But as being a purveyor of the way that he constructed his independent films and those sets was really telling of the culture that we see now. I think it's also about safety. This idea of being safe, having a safe set, and just being really specific about who you have on that set. Um, and not having this old idea about what set culture is. So also sometimes diversity lends to that because you have individuals who are more open-minded about space, and they
Hmm.
share the same ideas about space and respect on the set. And so it's easier to say, well, let me hire this woman or let me hire this person of color because I know that based on not only their oppressive experiences, but the way that they look at the world, because who they are is going to inform this film better. Film always works better when everybody loves showing up,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
everybody can get along. Everybody, when it's time to eat meals, we are not like separated and being weird. Even though if it's our first day on set, we can break bread and it could be that type of thing. So I think that that's also uh, lends to that. ideal and kind of wanting that. And even, with Me Too and Time's Up and that type of thing, people are really being, some people, because of course we know that from this report everything is not perfect, that some
Mhm.
people want to change culture. I know me and my producer, we always talk about this. We know that people get to set and they can be really mean and just really weird and do all types of things that just
Mhm.
kind of take negativity. And
Mhm.
it's like, we want a set where people feel comfortable, they want to come back and work with you. Why not have a safe place where they're respected? Why not create a new idea of film culture and not the one that Hollywood is used to? Because we know how that turned out.
Right.
We're we
Right.
we know exactly how that's turned out, and I think that is also, on top of the pandemic, that's informed not only how we watch movies but how we make movies and who we involve. I do know that one thing that is absolutely true from that report is that, and what is not new, is that people of color and Black people have always been the movers of culture.
Mhm.
We are
Mhm.
spending the most money on everything in this country. We are the drivers. We're the ones you should pay attention to. So don't ever say, oh, Jordan Peele is the only Black director of mainstream talent that can produce a sci fi. He is not. I'm
Absolutely.
assuring you, because Black folks love sci-fi.
Right.
We watch all that stuff from the 80s. Because even when nothing features us, that's the thing. This is the difference. Even when we're not being represented or not being featured, we still support it. We went
Right.
to go see The Fly. We went to go see The Thing.
The
We went to go
Freddy
see The
movies.
Blob.
Yeah. Yeah.
We went to go see all of this. Just like I was
And
saying, me and my wife, we were at Halloween Ends.
mhm.
Like, we went to go
Mhm.
see Smile.
Mhm.
Like, all of these films, we participate in culture. We participate in mainstream film. We're going to spend money on it. We're thinking about renting out a screen for Black Panther. Like,
Oh,
that's,
wow.
we participate in culture, you know. Um, in supporting film in any type of way. We do that, and we buy merchandise, we buy tickets in advance, we make field trips out of it. We're going to spend money. I mean, people may be sharing passwords, but we're going to figure out how to get Netflix. And
Yeah.
in that, though, right, I'm using my account. How many hits are you getting if we watch this movie more than once?
Mhm.
Like, we have you have these accounts, Disney and Hulu and Netflix, all of these types of things. Actually, all streaming is starting to come to a head where they're creating accounts. HBO Max, Stars, all of these things. We're buying into this stuff, and we are the drivers of culture. We always have been, and it's not new. And it's not like, oh, in a couple of years this is going to double. We've always driven the culture. And to say that this is something that we're going to see or something that has changed is absolutely false. Because even when you're talking about early Hollywood, and you're talking about films in the 30s, and you're talking about those westerns, I have elders who have memories of going to the movies to watch those. I have
Yes, me
elders who have
too.
memories of segregated movie theaters who still paid into the Hollywood movies and who still played into American film culture. And so we've always been drivers. It doesn't matter. You're a sharecropper's child. You made some type of money. You're going to the movies. You're going to figure it out. Y'all set up a screen somewhere in the
Yeah.
fields like that. It's always been that way. We're always been drivers of culture. And of course, we can talk about, I mean, this is a conversation that people have in several industries, right? In the beauty industry, in the hair industry, in the fashion industry, in the music industry, being the drivers of culture, being the ones who spend the most money, um, and buying into, you know, the popular culture behind behind the films,
Mhm.
so, you know, um, we could see that with, I mean, I know this is not a part of this statistic specifically, but we can see that with Miles Morales.
Mhm.
Um, you have uh you have two things. We're always going to support if we like it. If it seems good, we're going to spend money on it. If our friends or family tell us that it's good, because Black folks are such word of mouth folks, we need to
Yeah,
hear
social
something
proof, as they
something
call it.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, social proof. Yeah, so that's part of culture. You tell me it's good. Oh, I'm going to spend money. Oh, I'm taking whoever. I'm taking the kids. This is the whole thing. This is what we're doing. And I think part of it does kind of make me a little mad because it's like, how do you think you're getting rich? Who do
Mhm.
you think is buying into these things? Like, who do you think is buying into this? Um, it's our teenagers, it's our college kids, it's all of us. It's all of us. Um, and and I don't know what needs to change because Black folks have been talking about this for a very long time. We talk about it when we talk about accolades. We talk about it when we're talking about representation. We are the ones paying into this stuff. Give us tangible things. We're going to watch it. It doesn't matter. I know there are people who are watching shows and watching movies. Like I said, we don't have to watch stuff. People don't have to look like us for us to,
Mm,
to pay attention to things. But
mhm.
I do know for a fact in some ways that when things feature mostly diverse casts, and this was also a statistic, when things feature mostly diverse casts or Black leads, are white folks consuming that content? Or
Good
is it
question.
just us? Or is it just us? Because we're always going to consume stuff. I mean, because we talk about Tyler Perry all the time, but we're still consuming Tyler Perry. Like,
Mhm,
we are still consuming Tyler Perry.
mhm,
Like, we're still supporting his career. And
mhm.
even if it's not the bulk, he has an audience that's bigger than what we can fathom because his success is, it shows, like, his success is proof of that. Like, we're
Right,
like,
right.
well, his success is proof of that because he's, of course, not telling stories that, major studios were interested in greenlighting. So we know that there is proof behind the success in his audience. So, it's if that, and I feel that's another thing. If Tyler Perry wasn't proof that Black people are going to buy into a certain
Mhm.
part of the fabric of this idea of American film culture, then I don't know what other proof you need. I mean, so I think that's a thing. I mean, because at the same time, going, to discuss talking about the accolades, I think that's the ebb and flow. So I think there's always one good year where the people are like, I think there were some Black films, let's put those in there. And then the next year it's not. But we're always producing content that's lit. We always have actors that are out acting everybody, or directors who are like coming, um, they're, they're superseding or innovating something every single time, every
Right,
single year. And it's not even a bias. It's truly in some years, not even a competition. It's not even it's a no-brainer. Like, it's a no-brainer. Um, so yeah, I know that's all over the place. But I do think that.
but that leads into the last question I had, which was, how can, Black people and the queer community and, Latinx community and Asians and other groups that are underrepresented, I'm not going to buy into the overrepresentation concept. How can we harness that consumer power and show Hollywood, look, like you said, we're subscribers to all these streaming services, we're ticket buyers. How do we harness that instead of just taking whatever we're given? I know
It
that's a
comes
huge question, but
Yeah, I think it kind of is it's a lot of variables. People who are creating need to create more. People who, and in a realistic way, I guess. So, like, create more things, network more, get out into more spaces, but also take advantage of the free spaces. So, or the spaces where it's easy to have contact with. And, BT Plus, for instance, Tubi, these platforms kind of get um,
Overlooked a little bit.
stereotyped.
Yeah,
Yeah, they get overlooked, they get stereotyped, but it's a platform that's necessary because Black people are still watching this stuff. Even if we're cracking on it, we're still buying into it. We're still paying for these memberships. We're still recommending these films, and there is good content. So it's kind of like make, intentional moves and how you get your work out there. Um, because accessibility is always going to be a question, but I think that the more opportunities, the more platforms that are created, then accessibility is just going to be, everyone. I think that's one thing is just kind of, keep creating intentionally. I think it also is kind of like a sales pitch, and just I think the sales pitch, meaning how do we get people interested in film, but also at the education space, the people that are already interested in film, how do we mold them in a way to look at a nuanced perspective when they're creating content to be inclusive in a way that enriches their story?
hmm
And I know that sounds like a lot and it sounds very specific, but that's really it. So being an educator is really about saying to the future filmmakers and these future media creators, not only use your voice, but how can you use your voice to amplify what isn't already happening? Because this is a generation of individuals who is open to change,
hmm
unlike their elders,
Right.
right? They're open
Right.
to change, they're open to influence. Now, is there laziness? They're kids, of course. We all go through that in terms of like the when and where and the opportunity. But they have the mindset to say, everybody doesn't have to look like me already. They're already thinking that. They're already thinking good story sells. It doesn't matter who's behind it, good stories sell. So if that's the sales pitch, then not to say that we're going to have a kumbaya moment, but
hmm
the evolution is upon us because it's very real, it's very tangible. Film is not a rich man's game anymore. That's not how it works. Anyone can film. And I really do think that using any platform that you have access to put out content is really all that matters. Like it really has more value than when we were told write this script and sell it to Paramount and get your film made. It has more value than me finding people who have like minds, creating something that is good and putting it somewhere, because that is how everyone is being discovered or everyone is getting opportunities. There's mentorships, there's labs, from Sundance to Hillman grad to all these different opportunities. And especially because there are specific opportunities for people of color, for Black folks, for women, for queer folks, for genres that are underrepresented when it comes to people of color. I
hmm
think a big thing that I'm noticing, and I'm part of the problem, I could say, when it comes to like Asian American film and kind of being an advocate in the same way that I am for Black film,
hmm
because it is the same. Like, and I guess not recognizing, because being kind of narrow in my view of saying we need to get Black representation, we need to get Black women, we need to get queer stories,
hmm
and not realizing y'all not talking about anybody else either. Like taking myself out of it, because even the statistics did talk about that. Like this overrepresentation, this idea of this overrepresentation is that now we have Black and white kind of competing in this way where Black people are kind of catching up to white folks. But where are our other people of color at? What are
Right.
the strides that are being made on their behalf in that representation? And they're not making whack content either.
hmm
Like that content is amazing and it's really popular, and folks are buying into it. And of course, in the TV space, it's huge as well. Um, I think over the past 10 years, I've never seen so many opportunities stateside to go to a theater and watch a Bollywood film.
Mhm.
that I always only had access if I was at an Indian restaurant or something.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've noticed that with a
And
lot of the theaters, yeah.
yes, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, people are getting it." Like, I always understood, I always seen it, I participated in it, but now it's bigger than that, and it's kind of like, "Okay, how do I integrate this into this nuanced perspective of storytelling?" Because Bollywood films are amazing. I don't know if you've ever
They are
actually
amazing.
watched.
Yeah.
I'm like, "What is going on over here? These are great. This is great." Um, and of course, talking about mainstream stuff, you talk about Crazy Rich Asians, you talk about Everything Everywhere All at Once. These are some of the best films I've ever seen in my entire life.
Absolutely.
Then you have, yeah, these are some of the best films that you have in your entire life. Then you have you have the film Lovebirds. Um, what's the guy's name? With Issa Rae
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking. I can't think of his name, but yeah.
I can never pronounce it, and so I was just going to try, but it's terrible because I don't want to be that person mispronouncing people's names. But I also actually really loved that movie, and not just because I thought it was really hilarious, but I don't think in my generation, his name is Kumal.
Mhm.
Um, me growing up, I'm 36, never seen interracial relationships on the big screen. And that's
Certainly
also,
not,
I think that was a
yeah,
prime.
certainly not something beyond black and white. Yeah.
Oh, that was an excellent movie. Yes. It's usually black and white, or it
Mhm.
might be white and other. It's always white and another minority group,
Mhm.
right? And to see a black woman and an Indian man on screen and them both being deep brown was kind of like, oh. And even hearing a comment, someone was like, "Well, I'm not gonna watch that movie because I don't feel as though like I don't," whatever their bias was basically like black women being attracted to not black men
Okay.
is such a turn off. And I was like, I don't know what that has to do with any of this. This movie is hilarious. And their comedic timing together is great. Um, but I think that is the evolution. These types of films, these type of stories are the evolution, and I feel as though it's slow. I feel like it's picking up in a monumental way since 2018. And I think that what we're going to continue to see is just breakthroughs.
Mhm.
People finding opportunities to tell their stories any way that they can. And if TV is the place that's letting Black folks tell their stories in a way that they weren't before, people are going to take that opportunity. If people have a film idea that they can get people to rally around, and it just needs to continue to be this way and keep that energy and just keep that fervor and just support. And I feel like unless we're all making films, and I know that all of us are not making films and some of us are just consumers, we just have to continue to support. Yes, if you go see um what's what's that movie? The one Darling,
Oh, yeah,
what's
Don't
that movie
Worry. I
called?
can never think of the title. Don't Worry, Darling, or
Don't
something like
Worry,
that.
Darling.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So if we can have films, if Black folks can go see a film like Don't Worry, Darling, and then we can go see Till, then that's great. Keep doing that. And I feel like, to be honest, when we see a film that's made by a Black woman or by a Black man or has a Black lead in it, we need to go watch that movie.
Yes.
Stream it on the night of. Go to the theater and watch it that weekend, because that is my answer to that question. How, as consumers, do we continue to push the mark? And that's to continue to support. Go
Yes.
see those movies. And yes, and I understand that sometimes we get to this place where we're like, well, these films are really traumatic, um but the reality is that Black lives are traumatic
Mhm.
sometimes.
Mhm.
They are traumatic. But if you're supporting all the films, you will see the diversity in the stories.
Right.
You will see the diversity. There are comedies, there are dramas, there are romances, there are horrors, there are historical pieces. But we do need all these stories to be mainstream. We need Emmett Till's story to be mainstream for this generation. We need that history to be popular. I mean, to be public. We need that because while we have Till, we have Black Panther.
Right.
Like we have that, right? So it's not lost. It is Black culture, but I think we have to be supporting these films. You go see Sonic, great. Go see Wendell and Wild. Like go, because you have those options. I mean, Marlon Wayans just came out with a October film, a Halloween film. It's a family film. So I think that's coming out soon. The Wendell and Wild is out. There's a new anime, and that's another thing. Animation is also a big deal in terms of we're starting to see more animations that feature Black skin, brown skin.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's like, yeah, okay, this is amazing because growing up, Powerpuff Girls, Doug, Dexter's Lab, Flintstones, Jetsons, none of these people look like Black folks, right?
Right.
None of these people
Nothing.
look like
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have this whole movement of when you started having Black characters, Black people weren't voicing them, right? So it's kind of like, and when we say stuff, people are listening, right? So when we started saying this is racist because you need to have that nuanced perspective from a Black voice,
right?
You're parodying us. They did listen. People quit these positions. And I feel like sometimes it is a thing. Do we want stuff to happen in a certain way? And no, we don't have to just take what we're given. But I feel like as people who are buying into things, it changes things. Or simply always boycotting works too. Because the Oscars So White definitely did help because people are still using that hashtag to this day.
Yes.
To reference a very poignant time in American film history and American film culture. We still use this term today because it's not solved. It's not a solved problem. So.
Well, Cristyn, I just appreciate you sharing your expertise. Anything else you want to add or got anything coming up that you want to plug or?
I'm kind of in the vault, working on several different stories, a couple serials, a feature. So I'm just working on those things. I'm mostly teaching. So I'm just really trying to take that time to just create. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm working on an animation right now also. So that's also part of my mind. So we're doing some character design. It's off of a short that I wrote a couple of years ago called No Pride in Death. And it's about erasure. And just telling a queer story. And so I think this is going to be a very good story because it's going to feature, all Black characters. We're going to have Black voiceovers, have a Black animator.
Awesome.
And so I'm really excited about that project.
Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's keep in touch.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
When our demographic numbers are pushing 19% of historically underrepresented peoples in this country, and yet we're still hovering around 3% in general across the board representation in all media. And I'm talking about, kids' books, all of the stuff that you and I are excited about, storytelling spaces. Then what we're seeing is, such a huge discrepancy between demographics and those who are behind and in front of so-called cameras.
If you like these videos and you would like more content like this, please consider becoming a member on Patreon. Link in the description box.